Thank you. Yassine, go ahead.
Great. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Deborah, for introducing us. My name is Yassine Khan, and I work with the UC Berkeley Labor Occupational Health Program, and this is my colleague, Robin. So Robin and I work together at the Labor Occupational Health Program, and Robin is going to be monitoring the chat throughout the session, so feel free to type any questions that you have, and we'll stop periodically to kind of see if anybody has questions. So today we are going to be talking about young workers during the COVID-19 pandemic and really beyond that as well, and talking about why occupational health and safety is so important. So many at-promise students are working or participating in career technical education while they complete their high school degrees, but there is unfortunately commonly this sort of missing piece in their experience, which is really training in work-related health and safety skills. And schools can play a really important role in teaching these really essential kind of critical thinking skills that students can use as they move through their working lives. So now, why is it important to teach occupational health and safety in schools? There are many, often like many more than people kind of imagine. This is a huge issue. So in the US, nearly 3.5 million people are non-fatally injured at work. And there were over 5,000 fatalities. In California, you can see the numbers on the slide as well. There were 376 work-related fatalities, and then over 400,000 non-fatal injuries just in the state of California alone. And now when we're talking about young workers, the rate of injury for young workers, and by that we mean workers that are 25 years old and younger, it's almost twice as high for them as it is for workers that are above the age of 25. And it is also, you can see some stats on the slide here, but it's really important to kind of focus in on this population. So we kind of can think about them in two categories of folks that are kind of under 18, but then also 18 to 24, because they are also at increased risk. So now I'm going to tell you a story about a couple case studies. So this is Sherry Sangi, and she was 23 years old. She worked as a research assistant in a university lab. And one day while she was working, she wasn't wearing her protective lab coat. And then while she was working with air sensitive chemicals that burst into flames, she became severely burned over nearly half of her body. And so the kind of chemicals that she was working with caught on fire, they burst into flames, and then they ignited her clothes. And she actually died 18 days after this injury happened. And if she had been wearing her protective lab coat, then her clothes would have been protected, and like that would not have happened, right? So this is a preventable fatality of a young worker. And we have another tragic story of two brothers, Armando and Hilario Ramirez, that worked for a recycling company that composted organic waste. And they were cleaning storm water out of a drain at work. And so you can see kind of this sort of trench. And so Hilario saw his little brother collapse and actually went into this 8-foot hole into the drain to save him. And they both died. And they were killed by the hydrogen sulfide gas that had accumulated inside the drain. And the only PPE that are protective, personal protective equipment that they had been given were painter's masks, which do not protect against hydrogen sulfide. And so there were, like in this instance as well, this is a completely preventable death. And here we have two brothers who are both young workers who were not kind of given the proper training or education or tools to be able to safely be working. So now we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at why young workers are at a higher risk of injury. So the first thing that's really important to note is that there are hazards on the job. So the way that we think about hazards are anything that can hurt you, make you sick, or harm your mental health. And when you're thinking about young workers, they're new to the workforce. So they're often experienced, and there are also developmental factors that are going to be impacting the way that they're kind of experiencing work, right? So something that might come really naturally to someone who's been in the workforce for a long time and kind of seem obvious to them might not be the case for someone if this is their first job. Also, they might be working in violation of labor laws. So in California, there are lots of laws that are age specific. And so if you're thinking about like what tasks young workers can do, that is going to be different if they're 14 or 15, 16 or 17, or 18 and above. And the same is also true for what hours they can work, how late they can work. And those actually change whether they are, it's like during the school year or, you know, if it's during the summer. So there are a lot of, there's a lot to know in terms of child labor law. And so sometimes employers aren't aware, sometimes young workers aren't aware, and kind of either way, there are lots of violations that happen. Another issue is a lack of training or kind of effective training also, and supervision. And then also the fear of speaking up, right? A lot of times when young workers are in the workforce and they are very eager to prove themselves and really show that they can do a good job. And if something kind of doesn't quite feel right, or they're not totally sure how to do something, then they might be afraid to speak up and ask for kind of clearer directions, or they might not be aware of kind of what their rights are, or even if they are aware, kind of having the like self-confidence and awareness to advocate for yourself and your coworkers is really something that needs to be sort of built up. So we're going to be talking about that as we get a little further in this presentation. Okay, so all of the work-based learning programs have to teach about health and safety. So here is kind of a list of different programs that health and safety is included in. And it's also really important because learning about occupational health and safety really helps to increase employability and really develop leadership skills. So like we were just talking about with the fear of speaking up, that is kind of countering that is going to be a really helpful lesson and provide really useful tools for young folks as they move in lots of different facets of their life, right? In their careers, as they're in school, right? If they're seeing some kind of injustice or they're having trouble with something, having some skills and sort of strategy in terms of how to stand up and advocate for yourself, it's going to be really important kind of across a person's lifespan. So this is a really, a really good time to start building those critical thinking skills for young folks. Okay, so now in this current moment of the current COVID-19 pandemic, occupational health and safety is more important than ever. And oftentimes what we're hearing right now in the news about young folks is really related to their unemployment. And so this is from the Brookings Institute, but you can see here that we have, this is unemployment rates by age. So this first kind of grouping is 16 and up. The next one is 16 to 19. So this is the highest rates of unemployment. This this blue bar right here is April. And then you can see that the rates were going down a little bit. And then this is from 20 to 24-year-olds, and then 25 to 29-year-olds. So you can see that this kind of bucket of 16 to 19-year-olds are being particularly hard hit, but the rates are very high for this whole kind of chunk of young workers. And now if we look at these graphs, what they really show is that the rates of unemployment are higher for Black and Hispanic youth and youth with less education. So here in this first column, we've got white folks, this middle one is Black folks, and the last one is Hispanic folks. And then here, the next one is by education. So high school or less, some college, and then college or more. So we can see how kind of these equity issues are mapping over unemployment rates that are happening. And we also know the same thing is true for COVID infection rates, right? And kind of like in the broader economy, what we're also seeing is that, while unemployment is an issue across the board and COVID is an issue across the board, that communities of color are being disproportionately impacted. And we're seeing those same trends happening with unemployment as well. And now another issue is that a lot of the jobs that are available to young workers as kind of an entry point into the workforce are particularly hard hit by COVID, by the pandemic. So you can see here in this red circle, this is leisure and hospitality. And then here, the darker blue bar are younger workers that are 16 to 29. And then this lighter blue bar are workers that are 30 to 55 years old. And so again, you can see like who is being represented in these industries that are like primarily dealing with other people and are really being hit with unemployment rates right now. So if we're thinking about like, what does that mean for young workers, right? There are a couple of things we want to be thinking about. One is that it's difficult to get unemployment benefits without a traditional work history. So for young people that are like, if you're entering into the workforce at this moment, that's going to be an issue. Another thing is that first jobs are really important stepping stones to kind of enter into the workplace. And that jobs in leisure and hospitality might not be coming back. And the kind of like connected to that is that graduating during an economic downturn can have lasting impacts like throughout a person's career. So those are things that have kind of, I think, been really publicized in the news, but there's also this kind of other side of things that there are lots of young workers that are working right now. So those that that have a job are being exposed. And so we've highlighted a couple articles here, one in agriculture and another one in grocery stores, and having teens really trying to fill in financial gaps that might be happening in their families from like maybe parents getting laid off. And also both of these articles really grapple with teens trying to balance the transition to working like to virtual school and kind of navigating their lives changing in a really significant way by being kind of existing only virtually, but then also being at risk and kind of having to go out and be working and be essential workers. And this is something that has gotten a lot less coverage, but of course is going to be really important when we're thinking about occupational health and safety. And another, like as jobs are like scarce and unemployment is so high, it's also going to be really like that much more difficult for folks kind of regardless of their age, but particularly for young workers who might not have experience doing this, to speak up for themselves when something is not right at work or something is not safe at work. Okay, so some competencies and kind of what we think of as essential occupational health and safety skills are that we want young workers to be able to identify hazards in any workplace. So something that we talk to young workers about in our training is that any workplace is going to have hazards. And it's really important to kind of have that lens and thinking when you're going into a workplace to think like, okay, what are the things in here that could hurt me, make me sick, or harm my mental health? And then the second piece is how can those hazards be controlled, right? So what are solutions to those things that could hurt me or make me sick? Another piece is what to do in an emergency. To know their rights and responsibilities, right? So on the job, what are they entitled to? And again, there are those differences based on their ages. And then really, really importantly, how to speak up effectively when a problem arises. So kind of embedded into all of those skills are the ability to think critically, to problem solve, to communicate and collaborate, right, with their coworkers, and also to be creative and innovative. And we're going to talk about a particular curriculum that is really designed to foster all of those key competencies. So this is a curriculum that is free and available online that was adopted by NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and it's called Youth at Work Talking Safety. It's available here. We have this link, and maybe also, Robin, if you could put it in the chat for folks. And so this is a curriculum that's like all ready to go with lesson plans and PowerPoint. And so it's like very helpful. This is another curriculum that is called Staying Safe at Work, which is also available for free on our website. And it's a curriculum that is really focused on teaching workers with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Robin, who's on our call monitoring the chat, is an area expert working with workers with like differently abled workers. And so if anyone has kind of questions or comments about that, Robin is just an incredible resource. Okay, so when you go to the website, this is what you'll see. So this is again, NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And you can download here the curriculum itself, the PowerPoint, and it's totally ready to go. So all of the lessons are designed for a 45-minute class period, and it's really flexible. And so you can kind of like break it up and fit it into your classes. And students really enjoy it because it's really very interactive. And since the pandemic has started and everything has shifted to being online, we've been working to adapt a lot of the activities. And so now we're gonna kind of talk through some specific activities that really follow that those core competencies that I mentioned of being able to identify hazards, think of ways to control those hazards, what to do in an emergency, and how to speak up effectively when there is a problem. So this is an activity that we use for identifying hazards in different workplaces. So we have a bunch of these different illustrations. And then when we were in person, we would kind of print them out and give them to students, and they could just like circle with a pen the different hazards that they saw. But on Zoom, it's a really easy adaptation because folks can just use the annotate feature and they can circle the different hazards that they see. So they'll say like, okay, this guy is like standing in grease. There's water on the floor here. There is a knife that's on the side. These customers look pretty angry. This guy's lifting a box really high over his head. That might be an ergonomic issue. There's hot grease splashing here. This oven is open. There's unlabeled chemicals down here. So it's just a really good way to get students involved in kind of participating and sort of thinking about like, yeah, where are the hazards? Robin, did you want to add something?
No, that sounds good.
Yeah, sure. And so this is a really great conversation starter. And again, like I said, it works really well on Zoom, and it's fun for students to be able to kind of interact. And I think it's also good because not everyone feels really comfortable like sharing and speaking on Zoom. And so this is a nice way for people to be able to participate, even if they don't feel really comfortable like unmuting and kind of speaking out loud. And then here it's also really nice that the pictures cross a lot of different industries. And so here we can talk about heat illness. And in California, we have a heat illness prevention standard that protects workers. And we can talk about like heat, rest, and shade, and why that's, you know, kind of what the laws are and why it's so important, and kind of like, how did we get to having that law? And also there is another standard in the works about indoor, kind of indoor heat as well. And so it's a good, I really love this activity because it really is a good way to start conversations. Another good hazard that comes out of this picture that we talk about often is pesticides, which is something that people might not think of right away when they're thinking about what hazards might be there for folks that work outside. Some other things that we talk about are just kind of like the workplace design, right? That we have in this picture, like all these people are doing really different work and they all have different tools that they're using. And they're all kind of working right on top of each other. So we can talk about that and like how the way that work is designed can have a really big impact on how safe people can be and kind of the pace of work. So we can sort of start with more obvious things like, oh, there's like grease on the floor and someone might spill, or like somebody could get burned here. And then we can sort of broaden out the conversation to talk about hazards that might impact someone more slowly over time, like an ergonomic issue. And it's just a really good way to, again, like start a conversation about how to identify hazards. Another way, another activity that we have that's in this talking safety curriculum is a hazard map. And so these are really helpful, particularly for students that are already working and have some experience. And so what we do in this activity is that, this is a sample, is that we ask students to think of a workplace and then sketch it out together in a small group. And so this example is a fast food restaurant. And so they would go through and sort of map out like, okay, we've got the kitchen over here, and then the bathrooms and like kind of the main area. They've drawn the parking lot, and we go through the different hazards and break them out into categories. So we say, okay, there are safety hazards. That's something that can hurt you right away, like the hot grill or the slippery floor. And then there are also chemical hazards and biological hazards. And then we have other hazards. So we can go through each of these different categories. And then students are able to go through, and after they draw out kind of the floor plan of the place, either that they're working or kind of an imaginary place, then they can go through and color code the different hazards. And this again is really helpful because students are able to see like the kind of what might be a short-term hazard, what might be a longer-term hazard, something that's really obvious, something that is not obvious, or that like you might not be able to see. So they're kind of what we're hoping to do again is expand their thinking and really have them think about hazards in a broad way. And then once they feel comfortable identifying hazards, we can move into controlling hazards. So here we have some pre-COVID pictures of students and the maps that they've made. And again, like they've got them all color coded here. And it's again, just like a really fun activity to do. So then when we move into controlling hazards, we have kind of two options for the way that we talk about this in the curriculum. It's written as a safety pyramid, but sometimes when we're working in person, we call it a safety bullseye instead. So for the safety pyramid, we can see that the way we kind of explain it is that, okay, there are lots of different ways to control hazards, but they're not equal, right? Like some ways to control hazards are going to be more effective than others. And we use this safety pyramid, this triangle, to help explain that. So the best thing that you can do if there's a hazard is to remove it. So an example of that could be like if there's a toxic chemical, to swap that out for a non-toxic version, and then folks aren't going to get hurt. Another example could be like in like for a fry cook, right? If there's like grease that's going to fly everywhere, to have like a plastic shield that's going to encase the hot oil so it doesn't get on other people. The next best option would be to create policies or procedures around the, like, whatever the hazard would be. So that could be like having training, having adequate staffing, making sure that if there are, like, whatever the policies are, that all of the employees are trained and have kind of everything that they need to actually follow through, and making sure that that policy is like tangible and can actually work in the workplace. Sometimes policies exist on paper and then they don't actually carry over in reality because they don't fit like how the work is done, for example. And then the least effective option that we have is personal protective equipment and clothing. So we are able to have a conversation about why is it that PPE is kind of the least effective thing, but that's often the thing that people think of first. So we talk about, like, why is it ineffective, and or the least effective, not necessarily ineffective. And so we go through each of these and then we play a game that is called the $25,000 safety pyramid game. And so in this activity, we give students, we break them up into teams, and then we give them different scenarios that are based on real life things that have happened. And we ask them to come up with as many ways to, like, what could have prevented that injury from happening. And then as we talked about, the different levels of the pyramid are kind of more or less effective. And so if you can come up with a solution that is going to remove the hazard, you get $2,000. If you come up with a policy or procedure that can improve the work, that is $1,000. And then you can come up with personal protective equipment, you get $500. And so we can kind of go through different rounds and different scenarios. And so participants really get a chance to practice thinking through, like, yeah, what would be the ways to control these hazards? Okay, so actually, why don't we pause there? Robin, are there any questions in the chat?
No, there aren't any at this point.
Okay, great, thanks. And so now I wanted to show a couple examples. So here for controlling hazards, this is one example that we would use for our safety pyramid game. So we have Jamie is a dishwasher in a hospital kitchen. To clean cooking pans, she soaks them in a powerful chemical solution. She uses gloves to protect her hands and arms. One day, as Jamie was lifting 3 large pans out of the sink at once, they slipped out of her hands and back into the sink. The cleaning solution splashed all over the side of her face and into her right eye. She was blinded in that eye for 2 weeks. So then we would say to the students, okay, so what are the ways that this could have been prevented? And then they work in teams to say, okay, well, she could have been wearing eye goggles, right? So that would be a $500 solution. But if they come up with something like, you know, why were they using that powerful chemical solution in the first place? They should swap that out for like a non-toxic, a less dangerous chemical, then they would get 2,000 points for that. And so it's really helpful. I think the dollar amount or the point amount is really helpful in kind of driving home that message that you want to be removing the hazard in the first place, not kind of relying on like goggles, let's say, that have to fit her properly and it's going to be uncomfortable to wear and that she has to remember to have them, right? And all of those kinds of things that get introduced when you're relying on personal protective equipment rather than sort of moving upstream and solving the problem on a higher level. This is another example. This is Bill's story. So Bill worked in the loading area of the district's warehouse. One day while unloading heavy boxes from a truck onto a wooden pallet, he felt a sharp pain in his lower back. It kept bothering him, so he finally went to the doctor. He had to stay out of work for a week to recover. His back still hurt sometimes. So here for solutions, students might say, you know, oh, well, they could use a machine. They could have lighter boxes. They could have 2 people working instead of 1 person lifting those boxes, right? So again, we would kind of go through and map out the solutions that they come up with in terms of how effective they would be. And students really have the chance to think through and brainstorm like, okay, so how would I actually solve this issue? And then these are just a couple other examples. So this one is a mechanic dealing with an injury from welding. This next one is falling off a ladder. So there are a bunch of different ones in the curriculum, and I think it can be really helpful because folks can sort of select stories that fit whatever their students are kind of whatever might be relevant for the kind of work that their students are doing. This one is about landscaping, warehouse logistics, and forklift. Okay, so that is kind of like a preview of our section that's focused on how do you control hazards. You know, so first you're identifying hazards and then you're controlling them. And then this next section is about emergency preparedness. And so there are different options in the curriculum. One is a game called Disaster Blaster, which you can see on this board here. And so it's a board game where students can roll a dice, and then as they move along, then they have different they kind of have different questions that they have to answer about an emergency, and they're able to move forward if they get them right or wrong. Oh, something that I wanted to mention about the safety pyramid game is that we've adapted this to work remotely, and it works really well. So what we've done is put these scenarios into a Google Slides link, and then we'll send out that link in the chat and put groups into breakout rooms. And then they can kind of like work individually on sort of brainstorming what their ideas are. And then we can bring them back together as a full group and sort of review what they came up with. And so with a lot of these different activities, we really have been able to adapt them to a virtual learning space, and it's still really fun to do them. And so I think that is, if anyone has questions about kind of how to adapt things, then we're definitely available to sort of help brainstorm and share the sort of things that we've done. And so with the Disaster Blaster game as well, there are websites where you can kind of create a game board for free and then have your students work through the game. And so that is also, that's like a good way to adapt to virtual learning. And then there are also real world case studies in the curriculum as well about emergency preparedness. And then for Know Your Rights, there is a labor law bingo game. Again, this is something that is absolutely doable online. There are lots of different websites where you can create a virtual bingo card. And then there are also lots of sites where you can create kind of virtual Jeopardy games. And these again they're just fun ways to kind of get the information across so that students are learning about what their rights are in kind of a more engaging way. And then sort of the last piece of our curriculum is about taking action. And so these are sort of the steps that we outline in terms of problem solving. So defining the problem, getting advice, choosing your goals, knowing what your rights are, deciding the best way to talk to a supervisor. And then the next one is kind of really about knowing what your resources are, or kind of like who can help you. And so being aware that there are kind of laws, there are government agencies that can help if necessary, also that they have lots of resources. And then sort of on a closer to home level about, like teachers or parents or trusted adults or coworkers, and really thinking through, like, if I'm having a problem at work, who can I turn to, who can help me? And the way that that is really like brought out in the curriculum is with mini skits and role plays. And so this is really helpful too, because in the role plays, what we have is that they'll like act out a scenario of a person, a young worker who's at work and kind of seeing all these different issues. And so we go through the whole role play, and then we say, okay, so now we're going to break you up into groups, and each group kind of rewrites the script. And so then now that they know how to identify hazards and how to control them, and they know what their rights are, then they can actually apply all of that information into writing a script. And it's really amazing to see students kind of take that leap from just kind of like taking in information and like understanding it as we kind of work through these different modules, but then having them take the leap of actually writing out, like, word for word, what would you actually say? Like, what would you say to your coworker, or what would you say to your boss if they're asking you to do these things? And sometimes students will say like, oh, I would quit. And we'd say like, oh, okay, but then you wouldn't have a job, right? So like if you wanted to keep this job, what could you do to actually make it safer for yourself and for your coworkers? So it's a really good exercise. And then it's also just really fun to see them kind of perform what they came up with in their skits. And it's really great because students come up with lots of really good ideas about how to apply all of the things that they have learned kind of through the course of modules, and come up with how they would speak up for themselves and for their rights to make their workplaces safer. Okay, so this is kind of just a wrap up to figure out, like, are youth work ready? And so the things that we want, again, for them to be able to do, our core competencies, are to recognize hazards, understand how hazards can be controlled, understand worker rights and responsibilities, to have some ideas about effectively solving problems in the workplace, and to know what to do in case of an emergency. Okay. I think we're missing a slide. So we have in our young worker program at LOHP a lot of kind of different aspects, but one thing that we do is called the Young Worker Leadership Academy. And so this is a three-day leadership academy for high school students. And okay, I think it's not loading the graphic that's over here. But this is something that we have always done in person, where we invite teams of high school students from around the states, teams of 4 students that get together, and they have an adult sponsor come with them and come up to UC Berkeley, and it's totally paid for. And we do 3 days of activities about occupational health and safety and young worker rights, how to speak up, right? All of these different kinds of things. And at the end of those 3 days, students go back to their home communities and then they create a project, a community project that shares back some of what they've learned with other young workers in their communities. And they do that by the end of the month of May, which is Safe Jobs for Youth Month. And so we have a whole campaign around Safe Jobs for Youth Month. And this year we're doing this Young Worker Academy online, and the application is open right now. It's due on December 4th. So if you have any high school students in mind, this year it is gonna all be virtual, and we've come up with lots of ways to make sure it's still gonna be really fun and engaging for students. And I included the website here, oops. Which is youngworkers.org/YWLA, which stands for, again, the Young Worker Leadership Academy. And we also have this kind of like scaffolding structure that's built in where alumni of the program can come back as youth mentors and help to facilitate icebreakers and different activities like the hazard mapping that you saw earlier. And that is, it's an amazing program, and students like really enjoy it and have really great things to say about it afterwards. And we have lots of clips on our website also of students talking about their experience. So if folks are interested, please spread the word with high school students that you know. And then for Safe Jobs for Youth Month, we, in addition to kind of the community projects, there's also a poster contest that happens every year. There are lots of different projects that students can get involved in. And again, all that information is on our website, which Robin also put into the chat. And then we have some other curriculums as well. And so this is Problem Solving for Safety, which is a CTE curriculum. Again, it's like totally free and available on our website. This is a new curriculum that was just from last year. And it is a CTE safety program guide, which again is available on our website. And that's it. So I have my email address here and Robin's, and yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll take any questions that folks might have.
All right, thank you. That was really interesting. As your moderator, I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Receive a certificate of completion for the course, the worker safety course?
Good question. They do. That's also part of the curriculum, is a certificate. And so once students kind of have gone through all of it, it's available. So teachers can just kind of print it out with the student's name.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so this concludes our session this morning. Thank you, Yassine and Robin, for presenting. Thank you for participants for joining us. I wanted to let you know that at 12:30, we have a couple of sponsor sessions, Momentum Strategies and Thrively. And then at 1 o'clock, there's the keynote address from Tyrone Howard. And at 2 o'clock, Thrively University is sponsoring a Get Happy Hour. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Hope you're enjoying the conference, and I'll see you in another room. Bye-bye. Thank you.